The wash cycle kicked on, and Orla watched as the machine dumped soapy water over her bloody clothes. She cranked it to a cold wash and poured in an extra cup of vinegar for good measure, unsure if it would do the trick. Shannon would have known how to get the blood out. She always had a trick for life's pernicious little problems. But Shannon wasn't here right now. You're listening to The Moth of Glen Mailey. Orla looked around to orient herself. The sun slanted through the window out in the rusted back porch, too bright and surreal for her bleary eyes. Morning bird chatter and the last of the season's remaining crickets in the grass felt too calm compared to the night she just had. The blue ribbon, miraculously clean, sat piled up on the windowsill. She didn't know who or what had tied it around her wrist, so wearing it any longer than she needed to felt dangerous. None of this made any sense. She shut the machine and leaned against its side, running her hands over her tired face, hissing when her fingers found tender, painful swelling along her forehead. Orla washed her hands in the shed's exposed basin sink, taking a wary glance at herself in the spotted, oxidized mirror. An angry purpling and a nauseous olive were beginning to crop up along her scabbed forehead. Dark bruising showed up like spots under her left eye. She snapped off the water, and her eyes drifted through the window to the copper line of drying blood in the grass outside. Sighing, she collected the hose off the far wall of the shed and turned it on. Orla shuffled through the ankle-length grass, using her thumb to plug up the end of the hose line as she sprayed the grass down. Pink water slid in rivulets down the grass. As she did, she felt some of her discomfort ease. Today, she'd have a quieter day and figure out, perhaps, a way to get in touch with Shannon so she'd come home early. Her anxious ears caught the sound of tires on gravel then. She did her best not to jump out of her skin when the car door slammed. She took a moment to gather herself. Depending on who was visiting this early in the morning, she wasn't doing herself any favors by standing outside on the property, bruised to shit, hosing blood off the grass. She lowered the hose slightly out of eye line and turned towards the visitor. The first thing her eyes spotted in the driveway was the white and black state trooper truck. The next was Brendan walking up the weed-clotted drive. Her stomach dropped. The last time he'd seen her, she was also scratched up. She wasn't sure how long she'd keep explaining all of her random injuries away. "Morning," he greeted her when he got up halfway up the drive. "Morning, officer. To what do I owe the pleasure?" she asked, dropping the hose discreetly into the grass behind her. "Doing some leaf peeping today?" he asked playfully. They both knew that Orla didn't have a single plant-loving bone in her body. "You could say that. You're up early today? What brings you over to this holler?" So that," he said, threading his thumbs through the belt loops of his green uniform trousers. He gave an uncomfortable lean backwards on his heels. "We got some out-of-towners doing some short-term renting over the Craneburn house." "No shit," Orla said, remembering the old man on the phone the other day at the supermarket. "Did the Crayburns sell their house?" "Cousin Crayburn brought out the folks in Minnesota. He's been putting their house up on Airbnb." He rolled his eyes. "Well, that explains the family I met at the market the other day," she said with a conspiratorial, toothy grin. "Yeah, that'd be them," he said, almost won over by the smile. Almost. "So, last night they kept this up because the wife kept calling. She said that there was some sort of screaming going on at the property next door." "Oh," Orla swallowed. "Yeah, sorry about that. Shannon left some food out back, turns out. Ended up getting a bear last night that I had to scare off. Big son of a bitch." Brendan's expression shifted into concerned study of her face and body. "That how you got hurt?" "No." Orla barked a short, humorless laugh. This was me falling down the porch steps trying to get the ladle in the frying pan." "Orla." Brendan eased out a short, empathetic laugh, shaking his head. "You and Shannon are one and the same, I swear, always getting up to something." Orla could only shrug, smiling wanly at him. "Yeah, I got myself pretty good on the forehead." She lifted a hand to hover above her swollen temple. "You need a ride down to the dock?" Brendan asked, gesturing back to the cruiser. "Probably shouldn't be driving in a state like that." "I'm good, I promise. It looks worse than it actually is." She waved him off, hoping he didn't ask for any further details. "I'm taking a trip down to town later anyways." Brendan nodded and untucked his sunglasses from his lapel. He paused before descending back down the driveway as he slowly unfolded his aviators. She noticed as his gaze fell down to the grass at her feet, to the slow dribble of water burbling down the gravel drive. "You'd tell me if you were in trouble, right?" he said after a moment. Orla's body froze, trying to keep any signs of panic from her face. She nodded, praying for him to leave before he noticed the color of the water seeping out of the grass. "Of course I would." She composed her face in the shape of an annoyed smile. "All right, I won't pry. I just know that you and the fella broke it off in New York, and, I just want you to know if anyone's giving you any sort of trouble, you can let me know." He gave her a discreet nod. A flash of anger ran through Orla. Dale was about as useless of a partner as one could really have. At her first office job at CERN, she'd met him, a glossy New York intellectual who liked to hear himself talk for hours at museums and art openings. He claimed for years that he was a filmmaker in the making, but never got around to putting even 3 frames together. Dale was capable of a lot of stupid things, but putting his hands on her wasn't one of them, thankfully. "I got it handled." She gave him a stern nod in return. Brendan caught the heat from her gaze and rubbed the back of his neck. He gave her a parting, knowing smile. "That I know you do. If there's anything the ladies in the family are, it's capable. Well, I'll be going, Orla." "Take care. Tell Nina I said hi," Orla said, doing everything in her might to keep her eyes focused away from the stained water making its way down the grass. Brendan didn't answer, but instead gave her a quick wave and climbed back into the cruiser. She watched him back down the drive and then disappear into the tree line in the direction of the Crayburns, her hand playing with the fraying hem of her sweater. When she could no longer hear the popping of the tires over the gravel and the engine of the car, she turned back to the house and made quick work of spraying down the front and the backyards, driveway and all. After she was done, she switched the fresh laundry over into the dryer. That was when she made a decision. She would be calling Shannon. Orla headed back to the house and grabbed her phone. She hated bothering Shannon when she didn't need to, made her feel a little less competent when she had to call and ask someone for help. But things were starting to catch a fever pitch down here at the cabin. Maybe a call would somehow cool things down. She didn't even really know how she'd describe last night's events, but she'd handle that bit later. Shannon's line rang several times without an answer. Something in her stomach dropped. Not to be discouraged, Orla called 2 more times, each call reaching a voicemail that Shannon had yet to set up. "You have reached." Orla disconnected and put a cool palm to her forehead for a moment, trying to keep the bedroom from spinning. Right now it was hard to tell if it was purely out of anxiety or an earnest head injury. She took a sharp intake of breath through her teeth and let the air sit in her chest for a moment, looking for the swell of her diaphragm to fill her body with calm. Then, she slowly pushed the air out and looked back down at her phone. She hit 5 on her speed dial and waited as the call took its time to connect.
"Hey, baby girl."
Her Aunt Bobby picked up, sounding brisk and surrounded by the clotted city noise of New York. The noise of the frenetic city overlaid over the quiet chirping morning horror here felt surreal in many ways. "Hi, Auntie," Orla said, trying to keep it brief, but unsure of how she wanted to phrase her questions. "Have you seen Shannon? Does anyone know what the hell is happening on this property?" None of them seemed like a good opener. "Auntie, have you heard from Shannon recently?"
"Not recently, no, but you know your grandma.
She clicked her tongue against her teeth.
Half the time she forgets she has a phone."
Point taken.
"You doing okay down there?"
Orla laughed, the only thing she could think of to do in the face of a question like that. "All good so far. I got a visitor on the property," she said, as her eyes scanned the tree line for movement.
"Did you now?"
"Yeah, something keeps leaving me little gifts." Orla shook her head. Bobby was probably wondering if the property had gotten to her.
"Oh, Rabbit? I didn't know that thing was still around."
Bobby gave her a charmed little laugh. "What do you mean, Rabbit?"
"You don't remember Rabbit?"
her aunt asked in disbelief.
"You used to talk about Rabbit all the time. Of course, you were a little young, about 4 or 5.
"Okay, but who is Rabbit?" Orla said, getting a little irate.
"Great. Yeah. I'll be there in just a second."
Bobby said over her shoulder on the line, her voice pulling away from the phone.
"Sorry. At lunch now with an associate. They just brought food. Anyway, I'm surprised you don't remember Rabbit. She was technically your imaginary friend. Of course, calling her imaginary wouldn't really be right. We never saw Rabbit, the adults, but you used to tell us all the time when we brought you down in the summer that you saw her. You'd talk all day long about what you two did that day, and Grandma Shannon started to notice that someone was leaving you little gifts on the porch all of a sudden."
"What kind of gifts?"
"Yeah, crazy. Most times in the beginning we didn't even realize it was happening because it would look like a pile of leaves, twigs, a dead beetle, little wilted flower. We'd be sweeping it off the porch some mornings wondering what kept blowing them in.
She laughed.
Grandma Shannon was the one who realized that they were all gifts, I guess. We didn't put two and two together until something pulled you out of the creek that one time.
Wait, what? Orla asked.
You don't remember that?
Bobby asked incredulously.
It was about 4th of July party. I don't remember what year. Only a few people were up at the end of the night, and we were convinced you had fallen asleep on the porch where we could see you. About an hour or two later, your mom was helping us do the dishes. She comes back and realizes you're gone. We all panic. Everyone goes looking for you, calling your name, Orla, Orla, like crazy. And suddenly, we hear this big crash in the creek and a lot of commotion. We run to the back of the property and see that you're laid out flat like a dead fish. We could see that you'd fallen into the creek, but it looked like something had pulled you out. Your mom didn't let you out of her sight for a week after that, I remember. And the next morning, there was a blue ribbon tied around the porch banister. Rabbit was the only thing on the property Grandma actually likes, I think. But we haven't seen anything from her in a while.
Orla searched her cloudy childhood memory, trying to filter back to all the summers spent here on the property. Most of it was a blur of getting her knees and arms scraped on the hawthorn, running through tall bending grass, fragrant clovers, the sound of crickets and creeks in the morning. Memories of Rabbit didn't filter through. Until she remembered one. A very blurry evening, something she'd always told herself she'd dreamed up as an adult. She remembered running through tall grass in the dark, only as tall as the blades themselves, eyes darting around to keep focus. On what, though? She squinted as if trying to sharpen her mind's eye, and then it all came sliding back. The bobbing, slightly luminous figure ahead in the grass, lit by the bright moonlight, only visible as it moved in the dark. Fur. White, silver fur. Orla's short, grubby legs trying desperately to keep up. Then, the sharp contact of rock against her bare feet, her world spinning upside down, and the loud clap of water in the creek as it swallowed her body. Stronger than any creek had any right to be, especially in the hot, dry July they had that year. And how cold the water was. Water rushed up around her ears until her vision went dark, and then the feeling of being lifted, yanked out of the black. Auntie, I'm gonna have to call you back. Orla went back to the laundry room and retrieved the blue ribbon. With slow, methodical care, she flattened it out and tied it around the banister of the porch. Then, she sat down and waited for evening. Thank you for listening and sticking with us through the series so far. The Moth of Glen Mailey will be returning for its last and final episode next month. Other housekeeping news is that you can now officially leave comments on Spotify. Make sure to drop us a comment, let us know what you're thinking of the series so far, rate the series on Spotify or wherever you're listening, and then make sure to share with your friends if you want them to check it out as well. If you are feeling particularly generous and you want to support what we do here, you can follow the Linktree links in our bio on socials and buy us a coffee or become a patron. As always, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time. And remember, always keep